What will the Denver Broncos off-ball linebacker position look like this upcoming season? What might we expect from rookie Drew Sanders? You're going to get that and much more in our Broncos Camp Training Camp Preview on the linebacker position here on Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Denver Broncos off-ball linebacker position comes into focus on today's training camp previews. We look at every storyline and every player. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. We're grateful for all of you in Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts. Or if you watch on YouTube, make sure you subscribe or follow as we inch closer to 10K subscribers by the start of training camp. We appreciate you so much, Broncos Country. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends LinkedIn Jobs. They help you find qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Sayre, we're just about a week and a half away from Broncos camp starting up officially at the Centura Health Training Center on July 28th. This week, there's some exciting dates that fans need to keep their eyes on, like the 19th. Rookies will report to the facility. There'll be some veteran guys that report voluntarily there as well. But, hey, we are one step closer to Broncos camp football. And I think when we look at last year, when we were doing these previews, the off-ball linebacker position was one that you and I were coming into things like, I'm not sure what the position looks like. I'm not sure if I'm confident with who is making up the depth at the position itself. And we were quite surprised how things played out during the preseason, during the regular season. And here we are. I feel like we're in a very comfortable place when analyzing the overall outlook of this specific position room.
Yeah, I kind of feel like this is one that helps you sleep at night, right? Just knowing that it's well taken care of. You got a mixture of veterans here. You've got athleticism. You've got instincts. You got smart players. You've got guys who contribute on special teams. You've got, obviously, the incoming Drew Sanders, right? So let's look at the position group as a whole. Obviously, starting up top, last year's top two starters, Josey, Jewell, and Alex Singleton, the Bash brothers out there. I think they're officially my Bash brothers, Cody. We talked about this on a previous episode. You know, there's other position groups that have two guys, but these guys are the Bash brothers. They kind of look like Fulton Reed and Dean Portman out there. But those are the Bash brothers. But then behind them, you've got a starter caliber player in Jonas Griffith. And then you've got, obviously, the rookie Drew Sanders coming in. You've got Justin Strnad, who led the Denver Broncos last year in special team snaps played. And then, of course, rounding out the depth chart, Ray Wilborn, who came into the team last season on the practice squad, and Seth Benson, an undrafted free agent out of Iowa this year. So a pretty big, significant Iowa flavor in this linebacker group for the Denver Broncos, which I think is very intentional. They're looking for guys that play that Phil Parker type of defensive scheme where those linebackers can stay on the field all three downs. And Phil Parker asks a lot of his linebackers there at Iowa. Just ask Jack Campbell, the first round pick of the Detroit Lions. Just ask Josey, Jewell, who obviously played for 4 years there. These guys get asked to do a lot. And I think even with the changing of defensive coordinators in Denver from, you go all the way back to when Josey was drafted with Vance Joseph leading the charge, coming full circle now with Vic Fangio and Ejiro Evero in between. It's really going to be a lot asked of these guys. And I think the Broncos have the right players in place to be asked a lot of, right? They have guys that they can take that on. They can take on that big responsibility, even if you do have to change some pieces here.
Well, and you need good depth at the position because it's physical. I mean, we even saw it last year in the preseason when Jonas Griffith and Alex Singleton were starting a game for the Broncos. It was a home game. I'm not sure if it was I think it was the first game against the Cowboys or it was the Vikings, one or the other. And there was a play where he dislocated his elbow. And you're like, oh no, like he was expected to start next to Josey Jewell for the regular season. And I think we were all sitting here like, wow, this is not good. Like Denver's linebacker depth is not in a good place. I mean, I think it's a complete 360 from where we were last year, as you mentioned. But look, hey, Josey Jewell, some storylines to watch here at this position. And Josey Jewell's in the final year of his deal with the Broncos as it stands when he got the contract extension a few years ago. This is it. And so for him, he's playing this year for another contract extension, or he's also auditioning perhaps for another team. He's a very, very good player, high IQ, understands the defense. And I think we've just seen him reach a next level, right? Year over year, I think we've seen him progress and get even better. So how can he do that this year is a big question. Alex Singleton, I mean, a guy who, as we call, a piss missile. He is all over the place when you watch the tape on special teams, on defense. These are your two guys who are going to be starters. So Jonas Griffith, as you mentioned, a guy who has former starting experience and is viewed as a starting caliber player and probably needs some more development, which is perfect because the team has team control over him right now, which is a great thing for them. And then you have Drew Sanders, who obviously is 6'5", athletic ability. I mean, it stands out. Denver, I think, is in a very good spot. And then Justin Strnad, in my opinion, Sayre, I mean, he's been one of their more consistent special teams guys. You mentioned that he leads the team in special team snaps. This is probably the one position going into training camp that I feel very confident. I think we talked about wide receiver as well. Defensively, this is one, maybe outside of the safety position, it's like, hey, I'm not necessarily worried about the linebacker position this year. And you go back to last year, remember they even brought in Joe Schobert, and that was just not a very good experiment, which was a big shock because I think for all of us, we look at Denver bringing in a former Pro Bowl type linebacker, and he wasn't as big as he was. He was much, skinnier, didn't look like he could play linebacker. And then we saw him in preseason, get absolutely demolished by the Buffalo Bills. So for me, I think this position, it's undergone a lot of change. Look, obviously a new defensive scheme this year, new terminology under Vance Joseph, but also a new linebacker coach and a guy that when talking to these guys in the locker room, Josey, Jewell, Alex Singleton, they love the fact that they have a guy in the linebacker room who has played linebacker in the NFL before. That's a huge boost for them.
It is, and I think that's a huge boost for a number of position groups on this roster as well, just to have that. And I love that you pointed some of that stuff out, Cody. I think it's really big for these guys like Josey, Jewell, obviously being in a contract year. That's something that it's got to be in the back of his mind, and obviously Jonas Griffith as well, kind of wanting to play towards that second contract. And that really leads me to my biggest question about this overall position group is who's going to be, starting next year for this? And obviously we're not necessarily looking that far ahead, but what are the Broncos going to implement in 2023 that's going to impact 2024, right? Is Josey going to be somebody that they bring back? It almost feels like a foregone conclusion that, well, he's not going to be back. It's going to be Drew Sanders and then Alex Singleton, who they just re-signed, but I don't even know. I don't know if that's the case. I don't know. Are they going to trade Josey here in training camp and preseason play? Like, are they going to wait for injuries to happen around the league or see what kind of happens with their own group? And unlike the rest of these position groups on Denver's roster, I really get the impression that this is the position group where there may be the least opportunity for a guy like, no offense, of course, to Ray Wilborn or Seth Benson. They may face the longest odds of making the team of any young player because this group is so solidified at that top 5. Unless the Broncos do something like trade Josey, Jewell or trade Jonas Griffith, that would be their only really path to the roster other than injury. So kind of get the impression like this group, you could kind of put it in stone who the Broncos are going to keep.
Yeah, 100% too. One thing that Vance Joseph has even said this offseason as well, when talking about a guy like Josey, he's the glue guy. Like he is, and he's viewed, and Justin Simmons even told us, hey, Josey's a glue guy for our defense there. So it's like, do you want to move past that? And I look at how Sean Payton, just from what I've seen from Payton, I don't get the vibe that he would offset that just to let a younger guy play. I think that, hey, if a younger guy can play, he's going to have to come in and prove that, hey, he can play, he can be a starter, he can give us everything that we need. If that's the case, then yeah, I think there would be a decision to be made. But hey, that's asking a lot out of a rookie. But that's what makes training camp, that's what makes preseason so excited to watch. And look, we're excited to be there. It's about a week and a half away. We're going to have you covered every step of the way, every single day here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. And Broncos Country, we're going to throw it out to you right here, right now. Do the Broncos have really any position battles ongoing at the linebacker spot this upcoming season? Is that a storyline to follow? What, if so, what do those position battles look like? You're going to get that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at LinkedIn Jobs. And these days, every new potential hire, it can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. And if you're hiring, you want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. And it is super easy to just create a job post for you and your company in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs. Then you add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread word that you're hiring. And they have simple tools like screening questions, which make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and the experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you would like to hire and who you'd like to interview as well. And it's important that you start off the new year with a bang as you go through 2023 and make sure you hire the right team member for your company. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
What does the position battle at linebacker look like for the Denver Broncos in 2023? And are we in for any surprises here? Or is it going to kind of be the status quo? Are we going to see the same guys that we saw in 2022? We're going to talk about that, those position battles, maybe a sleeper at this position to keep an eye out for. But before we do, from Cody and I, we just want to say thank you to all of you who listen to Locked On Broncos, wherever you listen to podcasts, or if you watch us on YouTube, and especially if you make us your first listen of the day every single day. Mile high salute to all of you, and especially the everydayers as well, Cody, for those who engage every single day, especially in the off season. What an awesome time to really just be diving in with Broncos Country, getting into the depths of this roster, talking about every single piece of this 90-player squad that Sean Payton is going to be overseeing. And at the linebacker position, this has proven to be, I think, one of the most important positions for his team. You look through the years, some great Saints teams, especially recently. I think of Demario Davis, one of the best linebackers in the NFL today, certainly underrated, but you could throw it all the way back to guys like Scott Fujita. You could talk about Jonathan Vilma. There's lots of guys through the years that have played critical roles on some of his best teams. So who's that going to be in 2023? Is it going to be Alex Singleton and Josey Jewell in the starting lineup? Or like last year, are we maybe in for a surprise? Like Singleton was a surprise last year to lead the team in tackles, to come in and prove to be a second contract guy with the Broncos. Are we in for the status quo, or could we be in for a surprise?
It's a great question because I think when you look at it on paper, you feel like it's going to be the status quo, right? And I think me looking at it on paper, my general opinion is I don't think there's much of a competition for starting jobs. I think starting linebacker job is already secured here for Josey Jewell, Alex Singleton. And I do even think that, hey, if there is a position competition in any way, shape, or form, like you mentioned it in the prior segment here on today's show, that, hey, when you look at it, like the odds for a guy like Ray Wilborn or Seth Benson to make the roster at linebacker, I mean, it seems very, very difficult. Like the path seems very complex for them at this point in time. And I would agree with that because you do have a guy in Justin Strnad who's emerged into now a veteran special teams player for your team. You have Jonas Griffith who can give you a lot of value on special teams. That's why George Payton initially traded for him a few years ago, and he has starter potential down the road with team control. And then you have Drew Sanders, who we all know is going to play quite a bit of special teams and even could be primed for a specific role in certain personnel packages. So is there really any battle going on? I say if there was, Sayre, maybe it would be between Jonas Griffith versus Drew Sanders for a specific role or a specific spot in terms of a defensive personnel package. But at this point, like these guys are also going to cut their teeth on special teams, which is a good thing. And it also takes away, I think this is a dynamic. It creates an opportunity for one guy to emerge. Alex Singleton was one of the best special teams players for Denver last year. Him starting pretty much, I think, takes him away from that start, from the special teams side of things. And this is where you have Strnad, you have a guy like Griffith and Drew Sanders who could become core four guys, which takes away your need of your starter on defense, maybe risking getting injured on a special teams thing. I mean, to me, that's how I see it playing out. I'm curious for your thoughts, though.
Yeah, what I really like about those two guys who we kind of project right now as backups, which would be Drew Sanders and Jonas Griffith, what I like about those two guys is I think they have the potential to be maybe really good pass rushers from that off-ball linebacker position. And of course, that was kind of Drew Sanders' initial position at Alabama, right? He was backing up Will Anderson off the edge there. Then he got to rush the quarterback from the off-ball linebacker spot, kind of getting moved around the formation. You send him on the blitz, you line him up off the edge, you do a number of different things there. The Broncos have two guys in Josey Jewell who, and Alex Singleton, who are by no means poor when it comes to getting after the quarterback. Those guys can do that. But I think maybe what's really interesting to me is that you could almost go in waves with these two guys if need be, or you can utilize guys like Sanders and Griffith as weapons for your defense in addition to the two starters that you already have. So it's not just that the Broncos have good depth. These guys have versatility to play a bigger role even beyond special teams, which I think adds value to this position group tremendously. When you have two guys like that who can get after the quarterback, or at least in the case of Jonas Griffith, the potential to do so with, I mean, he's one of the freakiest athletes on the team, right? As he's a 9 point something in the RAS, the relative athletic score
Chiseled
scale.
from stone too, by the way.
He is a freak of nature. Why don't we all look like Jonas Griffith, right? What do we got to do to get that? But I seriously think that this has the potential to be the best position group on the team. Whereas last year when we were looking at it, we were kind of thinking like, oh my gosh, the Broncos need to go get a guy like Joe Schobert in free agency, right? And then all of a sudden that narrative just totally flipped on its head. So there's just that veteran leadership that you have at the top with Josey and Singleton, then the athleticism and the upside and the potential for just additional defensive weaponry in Jonas Griffith and Drew Sanders. I think this is one of those position groups that, man, I know Sean Payton hates grades, but I would almost be willing to go A+ on this position group on the roster. There's nothing there that I dislike at this point, even if somebody were to get hurt, which of course we don't want to see, but you just feel good about it no matter what happens.
Well, I'm knocking on wood that, hey, the Broncos and every other team around the NFL can stay healthy during training camp and preseason. You don't want to suffer major losses. And like we talked about earlier, Jonas Griffith last year, we weren't sure how that was going to pan out. And the fact that he was able to recover from a dislocated elbow in, 4.5 weeks, essentially, to be ready for week 1 is impressive. But overall, I think Denver's in a good spot. And maybe a guy to keep an eye on here, I think, for Broncos country, outside of the guys that we've talked about, really undrafted rookie free agent Seth Benson in terms of special teams play. He's going to get some run in the preseason at linebacker, but this is a guy who I've seen during every special teams drill throughout OTAs, mandatory minicamp, rookie minicamp, that, hey, he stood out every single time. He was one guy that was like, hey, okay, there's a tally for Seth Benson. Okay, there's another tally for him. Watch him during the preseason. Let's see how things pan out here. Even if he doesn't make the active roster, I think he's a prime candidate from what I've seen to make it back onto the team's practice squad for the regular season, which does give them, hey, if you lose a guy to an injury, you can bring him up. He can play that special teams role for you, cut his teeth in a little bit more. It's perfect, I think, for where Denver is at personnel-wise, but we'll see how everything pans out. And look, Broncos country, we're always eager for your thoughts and your feedback as you're listening to us wherever you get your podcast, or if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you share your thoughts on the linebacker position heading into training camp. We're going to dive deep into our projection for the position going into the regular season. Who stays on the active roster? Who doesn't? Sayre and myself, we're going to share our picks. We want to hear from you on your picks on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Real quick, make sure you go check out the Locked On NFL podcast on YouTube and free wherever you get your podcasts in audio format, so you can stay in tune with some of the biggest news around the NFL, including over the weekend, DeAndre Hopkins signing a contract with the Tennessee Titans. The local experts on the biggest stories have you covered on the Locked On NFL podcast. How will the Broncos linebacker position pan out over the course of the preseason going into the regular season? We're going to share our roster projections on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. I just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for taking time out of your day to tune in, to watch us, to listen to us, talk all things Denver Broncos every single day, all year long. That's our promise to you, the avid listeners in Broncos country. No hot takes, no clickbait. We break down what's going on with the team. We look at it from every angle, and we love to include you in what we're doing. So thank you so much for subscribing or following for free wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. We are just about 20 subscribers away on the YouTube format from being at 10K subscribers. Thank you so much for making the show exactly what it is. Sayre, let's dive into this here because I think it's an important conversation. What does the linebacker room look like? How do we project it? And I think we've kind of shared a little bit, maybe have given listeners or viewers a little bit of a glimpse into maybe how we're leaning. I'm going to ask you, how many players do you think the Broncos will carry at linebacker going into the regular season? And based on that, who do you think those players will be?
Well, this is going to be one of the toughest, I think, to look at when you go over the entire 53-man roster. And again, we talked about this in our quarterback episode. Whether or not the team keeps 3 quarterbacks impacts every other position group on the roster, including linebacker, where ideally, I think you would like to keep 5 guys here, right? The 5 that we've been talking about, from Singleton, Jewell, Sanders, Griffith, and Strnad, those 5 guys you would like to keep. Now, my only question is, if every single one of them is healthy going into the season, do you stick with 4? Because not only will 3 quarterbacks make an impact here, but also whether you keep 10 or 11 defensive backs is going to make an impact here. So it's going to be a tough numbers game for the Denver Broncos. And if you look at your linebackers and you say, okay, all these guys are healthy and we feel like Strnad is, irreplaceable on special teams, like, then you have to keep 5 and you have to cut somebody somewhere else, right? You're going to have to be short in the defensive backfield, or you're going to have to be short maybe at quarterback, maybe keep that third QB on the practice squad, which I don't know if that's going to happen. But Cody, to me, Drew Sanders and Jonas Griffith, if they show enough on special teams, do you consider keeping 4 guys here at this position? Because that still sets you up well for the future. But at the same time, you lose a guy like Strnad who can play the core 4. I mean, like I said, he led the team last year in special team snaps. So whether or not the new special teams staff feels like he's irreplaceable is going to determine whether you keep 4 or 5 guys at this spot.
Yeah, that's the tough dilemma, man. Like, this is what the time of the year, like when roster cuts come to happen, fans are going to hear us say it all the time. Like, I do not envy having to be George Payton, Sean Payton, and the personnel department, because you have to go through roster gymnastics essentially to try to figure out, okay, hey, we really like this guy. We want to keep him, but how does it impact the decisions we make at other positions, as you've alluded to? That's so tough. I don't like that. It's not fun, but like, you make a great point too. Like, do you look at that? If those 2 guys emerge, and I think a big question too for Drew Sanders coming to camp is he healthy? We assume it's probably a hamstring or a leg thing that he's dealing with. How does that look? Because we know, hey, if it's a hamstring, those things tend to linger, as we've seen so far with several players on the Broncos roster last year. But I think a lot of it, you have to see the impact on special teams, but you also have to see how these guys play defensively. Like, if Justin Strnad is also going out there and playing really good, you can't cut a guy like that, because another team is going to snag him. And we talk about the linebacker position being one of the more physically demanding positions alongside running back, offensive line, defensive line, because it absorbs the most contact. I mean, there's a reason why inside linebackers lead the NFL in tackles across all positions every single year. It's because their noses are in the dirt. That means more opportunities to get banged up. And look, Jewell got banged up a little bit last year. There were times where Singleton was banged up, but still found a way, to make it to Sunday to be able to play. There's so many questions. I feel like you have to have five players at that position. And I think you can have a guy, with the expanded practice squad from the NFL rules, which has been a godsend. I think you can have a guy there like Seth Benson. Maybe you could even have Ray Wilborn there. You could essentially keep your entire linebacker room if you wanted to, I think, in Denver's situation. But I think going to the regular season, I think they got to get 5.
And I think that would be wise as well, just to make sure. Special teams has been such a weakness for you over the last handful of years. Are you really willing to compromise that any further by potentially getting rid of one of your best guys? So that, like you said, the preseason is going to determine a lot here. You've got 3 guys who are free agents after the season, being Josey, Jewell, Jonas Griffith, and Justin Strnad as well. So that factors in, I think, a little bit to look at the future of the roster there. But who do you want to keep beyond this season could be another question that George Payton and Sean Payton are going to be asking. And that could be a factor. Let's say they want to bring Strnad back on a 1 or 2 year deal. If they like him that much on special teams, like, we can't write this off as just, well, he just plays special teams. No, that really matters to NFL teams, and they are 100% willing to pay for that. So that's something that could get him another contract on this team. So as much as we talk about Josey, as much as we talk about Jonas Griffith, I mean, Justin Strnad is another guy that if he plays as many special team snaps as he did last year, again, he's due for another contract. And that could be another factor in this whole thing that just, it kind of thickens the plot a little bit at linebacker for the Broncos. But really, I think it's a good problem to have, especially considering what the state of the position was a year ago.
Well, and there are some guys, like I think Seth Benson loves football to a point, right? And obviously I think he'd like to play defense, but I think there are some guys who coming into the NFL, I think they embrace like, hey, I get to play special teams. I love it. And like, some guys take it and run with it. Like, look at Matthew Slater, for example, of the New England Patriots. I think if you were to look at any type of player who's ever played special teams, and you can make an argument, maybe one of the best special teams players of all time, look at Matthew Slater. Like, that is a guy who is talented enough. Like, he wasn't able to play as much defensive snaps, I think, as maybe a lot of people had hoped for. But this is a guy who plays over 100% of the team's special team snaps every single year in New England. He's a one special teams guy who's an ace, who's been elected to the Pro Bowl consistently, and also a guy who's received contract extensions by the Patriots. He is probably one of the best special teams guys of all time. And you want to find guys who embrace that, like, hey, you know what? I know that there are a lot of talented guys ahead of me. I'm going to do everything I can to compete, to make some noise for a position on offense or defense. But you know what? I can cut my teeth. I can make it in the NFL as a special teams guy. That's what keeps you in there, being able to not just specialize on one side of the ball. Those guys are the really, really, truly talented players who are elite enough to be able to play as rookies or as second-year players on offense or defense and become household names. But the biggest challenge is finding a way to stay in the NFL for guys who maybe aren't at that stature yet. And that is where you make your hay on the special team side of the ball. Can Seth Benson do that? He's one name I need Broncos country to keep their eye on in training camp and the preseason, especially if you're going to be out there at practices. Keep your eyes on Seth Benson, the undrafted rookie free agent out of Iowa, the Hawkeye way, finding its way to make its realms through the National Football League consistently. There's a reason why Sayre alluded to a little bit earlier in the show. But Broncos country, thank you so much for rocking with us on today's episode of the show. For all you everydayers out there, tomorrow's episode, here's what you can expect. We're going to break down the Denver Broncos tight end position, every player at the position, training camp battles to watch specifically, and how might Sean Payton utilize a guy like Greg Dulcich in the Joker role. We'll dive deeper into that on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.